So hello, I'm Frédéric Cuppens. I'm a professor at Polytechnique Montreal in cybersecurity. So I'm going to talk today about data protection. Can we win the game? So I'm going to start by giving you some figures. I'm going to tell you this number: 175 zettabyte. What is zettabyte? Well, this is the volume. By year 2025, this will be all the data that will have been produced at for the whole world. Actually, what is zettabyte? It's a billion terabyte. We hear terabytes a lot, but a terabyte actually it's just a good hard drive these days. So imagine by individual that, let's say that on average, every inhabitant on Earth is saving 20 terabytes. But it doesn't mean much. But if we can observe now, it's that today, produce data, if you take a look at the whole world, well, businesses are the ones behind this accumulation of data. By year 2025, business-generated data will increase from 53% to 70%. And why? Well, there are many connected devices. We live in a connected world because of those objects, and we suspect that by 2025, there will be 150 billion connected devices worldwide. So all these objects will produce a lot of data. And the consequence is that we're going to be moving toward real-time data, as you can see here on the graph. So when it comes to security and data protection, it is important to see that these data come from variable sources. But when it comes to the protection of data, well, depending on which kind of users or business users, well, it's a little bit different, and we have to take a different perspective on it. When it comes to users, well, we're talking here about identity, that is important, privacy, and there's also consent. So when it comes to businesses, it's quite different. Businesses put first intellectual property, the brand image, and increasingly sabotage. Sabotage can have very, very deep impacts for businesses. And when it comes to the society, well, there's misinformation, bad handling, mishandling of data, and a bit more concretely, when it comes to fake news, well, we're going to have issues with deep fake and AI that will produce deep fakes. So when it comes to the use of data, there is no separation between business and personal data. There is a strong connection between both. When it comes to businesses, it is important to take a look at the evolution. We're talking about a situation where information system use the data, and when it comes to the priorities for data production are linked to the confidentiality of this data. So when it comes to confidentiality of the data, well, you have to see the availability, and these are the three priorities that we see throughout these data. And when it comes to the evolution to connected objects, we have industrial systems, and these industrial systems, when it comes to the priority, today, well, what they want to do the most is to be available. And this has consequences. The priority is availability, so the usage that industrial systems do with the data is mostly non-protected. And this is an issue for confidentiality. So this is worrying because these two IT fields, industrial systems, are connected and there's a convergence between both sides. So once this introduction, once we spoke about this introduction, well, what can we do about data protection? So there are a lot of solutions ahead of us, but I'm going to take a look at two specifically. First, cryptography. This is very important for integrity and confidentiality. You can guess that very easily. These are two different techniques. For integrity, we're going to use electronic signature. And this allows us to have interesting security properties when it comes to authenticity of data, for instance. And when it comes to confidentiality, well, you may have heard of encryption techniques, but the inconvenience here is that the problem is that if we don't have the key to unlock the encryption, well, we cannot get the information. So solutions do exist, and we're working on this. And we can make some applications on the encrypted data. So there's two approaches. First of all, there is searchable encryption. We can find some keywords, and the homomorphic encryption. And we can do basic calculus without unlocking the key. But that's very interesting. But these are expensive. And when it comes to sharing the data, well, these are not also perfect and ideal ways to data privacy and sharing. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is anonymization. So these are oriented on how can we share while remaining private. So the first objective is to making re-identification impossible. So more often than not, we're ready to share the data, but we don't want those data to identify us. And the second objective is to make it impossible to infer sensitive information. What does it mean? Well, we do not want to recognize, we don't want to be recognized in a group of individuals. So for instance, imagine you're a group of individuals who have a certain disease. So you want to remain anonymous in this case. So what it's important to understand is that it's anonymous. It's different than pseudonym, like having an alias. For instance, we have all this information, date of birth, gender, postal code. Well, this is a case here. There's an American senator from Massachusetts who wanted to publish certain medical data and do it through a pseudonym. And then some people figured that even if you don't provide all the information, you can create some links in order to identify some people. And you could even see that this same senator was identified, and we have been able to identify the medical data from even the senator here. So this is obviously not enough. So when it comes to anonymization, we have to understand there is always a compromise between security and preserving the usefulness of the data. So when it comes to encryption, well, these are secure, but we might completely lose the data. So the more we anonymize the data, the more useful the data becomes. So when we're talking about anonymization, well, there's more than one technique. Several techniques exist, and I try to classify them in three categories. The first one is generalization. I replace, for instance, my birth year with my age. There is also randomization, which is modification of data. This is a technique that is used in sometimes. Well, but this also brings an issue of integrity. And the third category is to delete the data. So if something is difficult to make anonymous, then we're going to delete it. For instance, if we're doing epidemiological data, and these are a bit more difficult. So all of these techniques, well, the inconvenience is that there's no single solution. So how can you choose from one of them? So the answer, well, when it comes to the researchers, well, the researchers came with the idea of finality, the purpose. Whenever we want to connect some data and how do we make them anonymous, then you have to answer the question, which is, what do you want to do with it? So the answer is that being anonymous works. However, there's no generic ways to achieve this. In order to do this, you have to understand the goal. And this is when the consent issue comes in. The user must provide consent. But what we have shown is that although we give consent, we don't always know how the data is going to be used. So if we're going a bit further in these techniques, well, we have to understand that today there are different kinds of data. I've split them in three categories. First, structured data, which is database, knowledge graph. And then the next one is unstructured, which is found in body of text on the internet. And finally, when it comes to logs, for instance, network logs, system logs, application logs. And when we work on cybersecurity, well, very interested about these data because this is where we can find people who will not use the data properly. So this requires different anonymization algorithms in order to protect the data. We have to work on these algorithms to anonymize different kinds of data on the internet. So I don't have that much time, but I'm going to reach here my conclusion. And when it comes to the problem of data protection, well, there are some solutions. They exist. However, they're not widely used or not enough. We don't do enough to protect our data on the internet. So the question is it a losing game? Well, when it comes to this question, when it comes to what I have proposed during my presentation, well, currently, should we change the model? Maybe we should simply accept that our data is not anonymous. We do, we access free services, so we accept that our data is manipulated without being anonymous. So we have to be aware of that. And when it comes to the solutions that do exist, when it comes to social network, there's some approach. When we're talking about some alternative, let's say to Facebook, rather than having this global data gathering, maybe the user could have a larger hand on how this data is used. Tools do exist, but they're not widely used. And when it comes to the different use of services, well, perhaps we shouldn't have free services, but we should pay a bit in order to better protect our data so we can preserve some of the services that are widely used on the internet right now. So if you have any questions, well, I'm trying here to respect the allocated time that I was given. So thank you very much, and I'm ready to hear your questions if you do have any. So we've 15 minutes. I think that we're going to move on to the next presentation. But please, I would like everyone here in the room to write your questions or write in the chat box if you're online. And I will read some of the questions that are being posted here and online, and I will ask them during the Q&A a little bit later on. Right now, there's nothing in the Q&A, but I'm going now to ask my colleague Martin if there are any comments on LinkedIn. And Martin will copy and paste your questions and copy them here. So I have two questions for you. And actually, I'm going to ask them at the very end, of course. So thank you very much. So now we're going to Mr. Bienvenue. He's at Desjardins. He will introduce himself and he will have 15 minutes. His microphone is off. So we cannot hear you. So please, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We're going to talk about data protection and what do we do at Desjardins. So we're going to take a look at the good practices. My name is Thierry Marier-Bienvenue. I work on cybersecurity, protection of data, cryptography, and more recently, we've been working on a number of initiatives on protection of and cybersecurity in the workplace. So, what is the cybersecurity model that Desjardins has adopted? So this is we'll focus on what we're doing at Desjardins. I'll also provide some examples on what's going on in other financial institutions. So, in order to protect data, we have to add several layers. So here, I have here a great diagram. It's filled with information. Of course, we'll not go through all of this in detail. I am not an expert in all of those fields, but it's interesting to see what does cybersecurity look like in a business. We can talk about several kinds of controls that do exist. But if we take a look, we see at the very bottom the mission critical assets. So this is basically what do we need in order for the business to work properly. And all around, there are several layers. Data security. We're talking here about encryption, data classification. Some data are more classified than others. Managing rights. And there's also application security. That's very interesting. Managing the access. We have to make sure that application access are secure. So we manage here the endpoint. We're talking here about smartphones, computer, internet, different objects that are connected to the internet. There is also a firewall. And then we're talking about our network security. Finally, parameter. And the parameter, well, there's so many tools that you can see here in purple in front of you. Well, here, if we go a bit higher, further away from map specialty, and then the DLP comes at the very end. It comes to the data, the application, the endpoint, the network, the parameter, and finally on the left, you see here prevention. This is the left side in green, light green is prevention. And we're not talking about only about tools and techniques, but it's also the different policies, management, risk management, training. I don't vulnerability management. And on the right side, in dark green, we have operations. How are we going to answer? How are we going to use some security dashboard in order to see how we should react? And a bit higher, you can see the public clouds with, and then we have to do security all around here. And some will be more managed throughout the organization. And this is also managed by the organization in order to be well protected against different threats. So you can also see that a number of you have seen that near the network security, we see the little yellow font inside threats. We have to protect ourselves. We need to have a deep defense against inside threats. So what I wanted to show you, I wanted to show the global point of view. So data protection in itself can be done at several levels. We're talking about encrypting the data, infrastructure, public key in order to exchange data, but there's also protection against data leakage. So when we're talking about DLP, what we do concretely is that we need to block some actions and we avoid data from being leaked outside the organization. So every institution has DLP tools that are used at every level, and this has an impact on people's behavior, humans. So this has to be used not so strictly either, because we want to be able to have some flexibility. DLP, we're talking about Digital Guardian. Microsoft has some tools. So now I'm going to tell you which one I prefer, which one's best, which one is not. They all have the advantage and their conveniences. But the idea here is that you need to have the appropriate answer if there's any data leakage. Cybersecurity is great. It uses technology, but it's mainly something that is managed by humans, and humans must be able to manage this. So if we're talking about the data, well, what are the winning conditions for implementing a DLP program? What is not something that we have done specifically at Desjardins. So the first step for a good program is to have a good scope of a program.
What do we mean by that? It's a risk analysis, intrusion tests, exfiltration tests to give a view on what's happening and to ask the correct questions up till which point we want to go. That is, when is it enough? So in terms of coverage, what do we want to cover as data? I was speaking of classification of data. on data which can contain sensitive information, clients of the organization, or do we want intellectual property? What is priority? We cannot do everything at once. So to define what is the coverage, and after, in terms of depth, do we want to allow people to copy and paste the data, or absolutely not? Or if it's to get out of the organization, it has to be encrypted on a certain level of trust. So define a good scope up to which point we want to go. After, of course, to raise awareness amongst user to data management. And data is extremely important. It has a lot of value for the organizations. So we must make people aware that they manipulate data, to be careful with it. You have to have a good awareness program in governance. We're talking about training, ensure that there's feedback in real time. So if they do certain action is done, there's feedback that says it's done correctly. And on governance, if we want to have target thresholds, for example, we want to protect email addresses of our clients. We cannot manipulate more than 200 at a time. And that becomes with certain constraints, and it can prevent certain people to work to be aware of this. And classifications, do we want to share secret data? Is data classified as secret can get out of the organization, yes or no? So we have to think about that, these kinds of things. The third step is to come with an architecture. We're talking about the solutions that we wish to implement in terms of protection and data leak protection. As was mentioning, there's an array of solutions. There are many advantages and some disadvantages, each of these solutions. And we having address dependencies. Cybersecurity, we're there to help, to be a lever for the organization and not be a blocker. So we must be aware of this. So we have to be aware of the dependencies we have with other departments within the organization, and also the other security domains. As I've shown you, it's large. Cybersecurity is large. You have to be well connected to that and integrate well in a global cybersecurity program. And of course, this applies to everything which is in cyber. We deploy, and we've all constantly evolved. So on my side, we are really oriented towards projects, and people work in projects. We deliver for people in operations. It's really our internal clients. So we operationalize, we transfer to operations what we have deployed. So we do it by MVP, minimum viable product. So minimal viable product to get to reduce the risk as quickly as possible, and then to get in a continuous improvement mode. And that's really what allows us to go and get a reduction of risk. Cybersecurity is really the objective. It is to reduce the risks and of compromising data. The main winning conditions for a data leak protection program, which is successful, you really need a strong commitment from the organization. I've said it, it comes with impacts on people. So you need an very strong organizational support, and it has accountability. If people take bad actions, they have to be accountable for these actions. So you have to be able to bring accountability on people and to bring the organization further in terms of protection of data and protection against leaks. So I went fairly quickly. I don't know. I know I didn't have a lot of time. It's been 12 minutes. If you have any questions, it'll be a pleasure for me to answer. That was perfect, really. Thank you very much. I do not see yet questions in the chat, so we will do the same operation, meaning we will bring the questions together for the end, and we will move on. And again, thank you. A very interesting presentation. All of the issues which exist in the industry, it's really quite something. So we will move on to Mr. Harper, who has already shared his screen for his presentation. I'll let you introduce Mr. Harper as well. Hello. So first, thanks for the invitation. So my presentation today is to do an overview of some questions of what I would call as cyber insecurity. So the presentation could have been called "The Sky's on Fire" and is going to fall on us. So we will discuss about it because the goal of the presentation is to show you when all the measures implemented described in the previous presentation do not work. So what are the things that we can see? Unfortunately, the organizations must win every day, but the bad guys need only to win once. So that's what we're going to talk about. So quickly, I am involved with Crypto.Québec. Crypto is a name that was chosen before crypto be related to cryptocurrency. So is cryptography. It's a nonprofit organization which was founded in 2015, mainly for doing education on topics of private life, technologies, and numeric citizenship. So we've published 2 books. There's a first book which was published a few years ago, which was called We Are Looking at You, and recently On Vous Voit. And this year we published a book which is called We Are Betraying You, On Vous Trompe, which is about information online. So I'm a journalist. I'm mainly Pivot. You can find at the address pivot.Quebec, an independent media. So I'm doing investigation journalism, and for a few years I've returned to studies in computer science, which allowed me to be interested in cybersecurity and use this kind of knowledge in my work. So let's take the big threat that most organizations have right now is ransomware. What is ransomware? Basically, it's software which allows to crypt your data. We've talked about the advantages of cryptography for cybersecurity. The problem is if you don't have the key, you don't have access to your data. And the bad guys understood that. So what they do is they infiltrate network, they install something which will crypt your data and require money for you to undo this. In an ironic way, when you go on the leak of these sites, they talk like professionals. Like we've studied your system. If you want to have access to your report, please pay this amount of money. So they're pretty ironic about it. So how does it work? And one thing we must understand, and it's pretty impressive, is that they are real businesses. It's sometimes a very large businesses. Most now operate on like on a platform such as a ransomware service, on a platform similar to Google Docs or online for to do online word processing, but they have an online platform and to do ransomware. And they work with affiliates, which are independent workers from their home, find victims, infiltrate their systems, and after can use the platform to deploy the software which will be used to encrypt the servers. And it's the platform which will take care of the negotiation of the price tag for the and after publication of the data. It's why it's one reason why it's difficult to tackle. Often affiliates will be affiliated to another platform. The activity is unfortunately carries on. We're talking more and more of double and triple extortion. So the first is just crypt your data. You don't have access to it anymore. At some point, some more creative pirates decided that if they could leak this data, they could make more money or encourage their victims to pay quicker. And what we've seen for a year or two is on top of that, on top of extortion, some were starting to doing service attacks on their victims. So your data is encrypted. We are threatening you to publish them on the online, and on top, your website is inaccessible for a set period of time. I verified I've sent the presentation yesterday, but I must have changed the numbers this morning because there's 12 more. So on a doc tracer, which does the counting of displayed victims on the websites of pirates, is tallying now 6,852 victims since 2019. What we must understand is that is the tip of the iceberg, because people who find themselves displayed on these websites, well, there are those who haven't immediately paid often, or it's not all the ransomware groups which use this kind of website or who threaten to disclose the identity of their victims. In Canada, I had counted in that period around 365. In education, we're at about 300 victims, which are tallied on this site since 2019. One example in the educational milieu, it is that of Lincoln College, which is was a private university in Illinois, which this year had to close its doors. On its website was saying that it had survived to a major economic crisis in 1897, that it had survived to a major fire on the campus in 1912, had survived to the Spanish flu in 1918, but unfortunately, ransomware attack this year, combined with the problems of recruitment of students during the pandemic, did in such a way that they had to close their doors. The same thing for the UK. About 60% of the 166 colleges and universities which had been reported having incidents of various nature. The other threat we've talked about data leaks, which is a problem which often comes with on different forms. It can be ransomware attacks, and at that time, the data are leaked by these actors. It can be, as we explained earlier, an internal threat, like an employee, often either because he's angry or is attracted by financial gains, decides to leave with data. The thing that we think about the most is identity theft. It's one of the strongest consequences of this. All of a sudden, you've discovered you've received the government payments and you have not, or bought a house in Saskatchewan and have not. So these are things that can result from identity theft. The other thing is what we're calling harpooning. You've all seen Al had phishing emails. Click here to win a prize, or there's a problem with your Facebook account. Click here to reinitialize your password. So these are phishing emails which are sent to thousands and thousands of people without too much targeting, hoping to catch a fish on the end of that process. Harpooning is a lot more targeted. That I will use then data which are available on the web, on your social media profile, and now even more in data which exist in these leaks, to create an email and a message which is a lot more convincing, which is a lot more targeted to the person that I am trying to catch. And the other thing is that if, for example, in data leaks, there's your password for your LinkedIn account, for example, well, I could at that point in time check, can I use that password in other accounts? Because we often use the same for your Facebook account, for your Gmail account, etc. The other thing as well is the impact on your private life. We do many things that we do online that we don't necessarily want other people to know. One thing that made the headlines not too long ago at the beginning of Crypto.Québec was the leak of Ashley Madison. Ashley Madison was a dating website for married people. So they were advertising themselves as people for people who wanted to commit adultery. So when there was a leak, a pretty massive leak of their database with emails of their clients, it put a lot of people in trouble, especially those who used email addresses of governmental email addresses or employer email addresses. The other thing that I'm often using in my line of work with data leaks is to find, for example, other accounts that people will have. For example, if I have an email which I know on which I'm investigating is using, and that it is present in a leak and with a strange password. Well, sometimes to do a research for that password, we are successful in finding other accounts in social media that this person uses. So for private life and anonymity, these leaks can have impacts. Furthermore, before yesterday, I did a research for combinations of passwords and emails for polymtl.ca. That would be a nice, fun exercise, I thought. And in less than 10 minutes, I cranked out about 200. So I blurred out that out. And Laval University and U of T were there too. So don't feel too bad at Poly Montréal. We find people of all institutions in these leaks. The other topic, what I wanted to tackle this morning is, and that's the side that passionates me a bit more, is the espionage, sabotage, and hacktivism. So espionage, usually it is work from government actors to steal information of their rivals. Sabotage is really more destruction, and hacktivism is computer pirates, which will do it more for social causes. A few examples, more recent, furthermore. Hacktivism was very popular since the end of Anonymous. They were very active around 2012. It was something that was kind of a fad. There were many political groups which were doing cyber attacks. And in the last year and a half, it picked up speed. I've written in Pivot a few articles on cyber pirates from Belarus who are doing a campaign against the Lukashenko dictatorship in that country, which recently have claimed responsibility for attacks for the censorship service and of surveillance, a bit like the CRTC for Arcus, but a lot more teeth than the CRTC. Another example this week is Crywiper. Researchers discovered malware which was erasing data of mayor offices and justice and justice and 2021 Hafnia Group, which is probably related to China, at least the organizations of detection threat think that it's a group affiliated with China, have exploited a weakness in the Microsoft Exchange servers. These are servers which manage emails for businesses, and they found a vulnerability real atrocious. It was a large door, open door to go and steal data on the servers, and it was like a big vacuum cleaner for a few days where all the data were being pumped out from everywhere. And not too long after that, criminal actors got into the game and started using the same vulnerability, but to install ransomware. If we go a bit further behind, we have a Sandworm, which is a group of hackers related to the Russian state, which had deployed at that time a NotPetya. At the beginning, people thought that it was ransomware until they realized that afterwards the data were non-recoverable. It was a self-propagating software, and which was destroying the servers and the machines. And the first victims was Ukraine. Another example, which is really fascinating, is the Mabna Institute, which was active from 2013 to 2017. And it was a group of hackers which was related to the Iranian state of Iran, and did an industrial spying operation which lasted 4 years, which compromised about 144 universities in the US, 176 on the international level. And they would have stolen more than 40 terabytes of data. They would have targeted 100,000 accounts, email accounts of different professors and employees in different universities. They were successful in compromising 8,000 in their campaign. So to show you that there's efforts, pretty important efforts, which are spent on targeting institutions which are doing research because your data are useful and have a lot of value. I will end soon. So quickly, social engineering is simply to use more words than the computer to try to have what you want. So call up someone, make them you think that you're someone else to have access to information, etc. Skip over that. And after doing this overview, we still have to remind that you must not be fatalistic and you can protect yourself. There are things that can be done. The previous presentation showed the scope of the processes and the programs which are implemented to fight against the cyber criminals. And one thing that we can do as individuals is the first thing, and I think the most important, that we are repeating at Crypto.Québec in each of our presentation is the use of the password phrase. So stop saying a password, it's a password phrase because they must be long. And the other thing is not to reuse them. So use one passphrase for each account. And since it's impossible to remember all of this in your head, ideally use a password manager. It's a software which will memorize them and keep them for you. So I will end here, and if there are any questions, you can keep them to the end. Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much for the last slide. I hope it boosted the morale a bit. Yeah, that's very interesting, all of this. And again, I don't really have questions on the chat or from LinkedIn for now, so we will collect them. And once again, for the end. But that was very interesting. And furthermore, us as a team, we were targeted by ransomware. So the website has practically been destroyed. But I'm surprised of how many there are. Educational institutions which are attacked, and I can understand why. Now I understand why. So thank you. Hello to all of three. I thank you of your presentation. I think that I want to become a hermit, but your last slide reconciled me. Once the personal data have exited the business, how must we rethink regulations on the level of personal data, and what is the responsibility of the business up to what year after a data leak a business can be held responsible, or are there any mechanisms that we can implement to protect the private life of people once the data have exited? I'm thinking, for example, of bank data of several banks which were published where people, there's a protection via different organizations such as Equifax, for example, but how should we rethink the regulation so that the individuals not be left to themselves once their individual data have disappeared? Does it mean that we must completely rethink the way that we see personnel identification must develop now that the data are public? I don't remember what portion of the population has had its non-negligible amounts of their personal data stolen. I'm wondering right now, is it the time to, at great speed, to deploy personnel identification means with our social insurance number? What repercussions could it have on businesses? I can attempt to answer partly. I think that we cannot expect that businesses and institutions, universities, be able to defend with a high level of guaranteed trust against any attack. cybersecurity works with risk. There's no zero risk. So when we consider that information, the best solution is a bit like had said Mrs. Baudry. It is clearly to rethink our way of identifying social insurance number is something which is obsolete. We're ready to maybe move on to a numeric identity kind of basis. There are projects underway. There are questions about that, and indeed it is the right way to ask these questions. We should have asked those questions 15, 20 years ago, but I'm better late than never. I think that we must move on to the next step. The social security number is obsolete. Once someone has it, they can change it. Of course, there's people who ended up having it. It's a number like a credit card is less impactful because it's easy to change. Social insurance number does not. So passport numbers, they're all IDs, which are easy to obtain in massive amounts. Technologies nowadays and pirating techniques do not cease to evolve. I honestly believe that it is extremely difficult to guarantee data, that the data will never be infiltrated. At that point, we have accepted as a society that it's not going to happen, and we must move on to another level of protection. We have to look at digital identity options.
Mais c'est ça, l'an dernier, le gouvernement a adopté un...
Last year, the government passed a bill, and it went in the right direction. Companies are now responsible for the data they're collecting, and they also have penalties. So this way, you can make sure that people are responsible for their data. But, as it was said, zero risk does not exist. We have to be careful, though. I think that there is a great number of issues regarding data gathering, data management, data leakage. When data leakage, we can see all kinds of problems. And one time I had access to it, and I called an employee to say, well, listen, your employer has been a victim of a cyber attack. And when I tried to reach the employee rather, the employee had left 10 years ago. So this is a bit all over the place. So there are a number of data that are not crypted. Imagine this person had data on a computer that was not crypted for about 10 years.
Je peux peut-être rajouter par rapport à ces réglementations, effectivement, la loi 25.
So, Bill 25. Well, we can find many things here. It talks a lot about personal data and security. Before, when a business had a data leakage, the first reaction was to say, well, it's not my fault, it's the fault of whoever tried to breach. And now, the responsibility is on the business. And the business, in order to follow the rules, has to follow a set of regulations. And this forces businesses to manage personal data. We have to see how businesses are responsible when it comes to personal data collection. So this is an issue, but let's not forget that the difficulty is that we have to put those regulations in action, and that is quite important. So once this has been done, how can we verify? We have to make sure that the business is following the rules and regulation. That requires a lot of work. Well, I already had a question regarding Bill 25. Bill 25, well, back then I was asked. We feel that although the bill has been passed, well, nothing is going on. We need new things to happen. And these new things, well, we have to make sure that now that the law has been passed, well, adopted, then we have to do something about it. And that requires a lot of work, as I just said. Thank you.
So today, I'm going to be talking about something perhaps a little less technical. So I'm going to be talking about cybersecurity as a culture and how to create a cyber safe culture. My name is Lydia Vermeyden. Right now, I have a joint position with Calcul.Québec and ACENET in Atlantic Canada. I am the manager of special initiatives and the director for the development of new services for research for Calcul.Québec. So most of my job is working with researchers and helping to develop services that work for them. And in this case, I've done a lot of work in the field of cybersecurity around training, awareness, and how do we take the next steps for our workplaces to make them safer, just from a people perspective. The first thing I want to say about cybersecurity culture is that it's something that you need buy-in from the top. So you need the leaders of your organization. Really, this talk is for you if you are in leadership, whatever your position is, or you aspire to be in leadership, because creating a culture of cybersecurity requires sacrifice. It doesn't come free. So you need to have your buy-in, your motivation coming from the leadership in your organization. It's not something that's built from the bottom up. So I want to take a slight turn here and talk about another type of workplace culture that has been around for a while and has had a similar aim in a slightly different context, but I think it's something we can learn a lot from, and that's occupational health and safety. Occupational health and safety really came in as a result of a lot of fatalities in certain kinds of very dangerous workplaces. And eventually what they realized was that the only way to make these workplaces safer was to really take a holistic, almost a cultural look at how to make them safer. And part of it was, in the first place, recognizing that these workplaces were inherently dangerous. Inherently hazardous. So if we look at the lower part of the slide there, I have an excavator, and you can imagine if you're working with an excavator every day, that it's probably an easy mental leap to think that your workplace might be dangerous, it might be hazardous. I have actually driven an excavator, and I can say they are very powerful and a little bit scary the first time. But there are some real risks there that presents to your life, to the lives of your team, certainly to your company if something goes wrong, to your employment if something goes wrong. But I want us to step back and think about, what if we treated the way we work with our laptops in our everyday workplaces, in our research, in our studies, the way you might think you would work with a piece of heavy equipment like an excavator or a bulldozer? What would change about the way you approach it? Understanding that your laptop, your computer, it is a risky piece of hardware. It's probably not going to run over you like a bulldozer, but it does open you to a lot of risks that have been discussed at length in this panel. Dangerous to your personal finances, your identity, your company, your job. Depending on the type of data you work with, it could be dangerous to your institution, even to your country. So they are risky and dangerous pieces of material, and we do deal with hazards in our workplace. They look a little bit different. So how is this dealt with in occupational health and safety? Obviously, they don't throw away these dangerous tools. They're very useful. They're important. What do? Well, they identify what is dangerous about it. What is the hazard? So you see here, working with a chainsaw. There's actually a website from the government of Canada that has requirements for how this is used in the workplace. And there are many requirements. I've just listed a few different points here. But one of them is fatigue. So you are not allowed you're not supposed to use your chainsaw if you are not well rested. If you're coming up to a break, because people are careless when they are tired. They want you to have training on every single piece of equipment. They want you to be aware of your surroundings, who's there, who is not, what the weather is, etc. So a chainsaw is a very dangerous tool, but it is essential to a lot of work. And we can't just throw it out, but we can use it safely. And I want to think about how these types of mitigating factors could come in to our workplaces when working with other types of dangerous tools. So, email. We've talked about in this panel what can happen with phishing or with harpooning, and it's dangerous. Email is your direct tunnel to the outside where the bad guys are. But many employees, most employees, I would think, even myself in day-to-day, we don't think about email as being dangerous. We just open it up quickly, we check it, we close it, we look at it at 3 a.m. on our phone. We do it while we're in the middle of Zoom meetings. Some of you probably have been checking your email while you've been listening to this meeting. We do it in between stuff. We do it when we're not paying attention. But it's dangerous. It's dangerous to just respond to email without paying attention. So what can we learn here from working with a chainsaw? Well, what if we changed the way we work with email in terms of fatigue? What if we didn't check it late at night? What if we didn't, if we were working late, we made sure we're not going to check our email after this time. We're going to check it not too early in the morning, maybe after we've had our coffee. What about training? Do we train people on how to respond to email? Do we train people exactly what we want them to use their email for? For example, not using it for communications within your own team. So using more secure tools, like there are a lot of different ways to do this, but this is an investment, and a lot of this is training, because you can provide these tools, but that doesn't mean that your team will use them and will use them in that way. The last is awareness. Are you paying attention when you're checking your email, or are you doing 5 other things? So this is a change of mindset that we need to bring to our workplace, that these tools are dangerous, they're hazardous, and the way we approach them fundamentally needs to change. So as I mentioned, security is not free. It has to be a priority, and that's where the change has to start. It has to start in your leadership, has to start at the top of your organization. And the way that you approach, as the leader of your organization, you approach cybersecurity in your day-to-day work, or the leader of your research team. Where can we learn more? I put this in because, especially thinking about the social sciences disciplines and the new, really the new strides being made in digital humanities as well, and the study of big data. I believe that there's a lot in cybersecurity that we can learn from these disciplines that are perhaps not traditionally associated with cybersecurity. And that's because for creating this culture, we need to understand people and we need to understand culture. So really, we need to be asking the disciplines that have studied that, like social sciences, anthropologists, the humanists, when it comes to building better education, our education majors, and of course, checking in with the models that have been used for similar problems through occupational health and safety. So I think we need more interdisciplinary collaboration. I think will be only good for cybersecurity going forward. And that is all for me. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madame Vermeyden. Thank you a lot for your effort. So je repasse en français.
I'm going to speak French. I'm going to ask a question from the Zoom. The question is by Stefan. He is asking the question to Mr. Harper. So I'm going to read it here. With a little paranoia, we even come to ask which password manager we could trust, without fear that there is a backdoor. So can we trust him? Well, as I said before, zero risk does not exist. For instance, SPAS announced last week that there was a cyber attack and a lot of the data may have been stolen. Well, for the most paranoid among us, there's also versions that do not send passwords on the cloud. So the data remain local. Of course, we change the usability. We ourselves have to move one password from one device to another. So we have to first do some research on which device we want to use. If I may. Well, to diminish the risk, I think that we should trust the community. So the less number of eyeballs look at something, the more secure that you are. So there are open source solutions that do exist. It is, well, are there ultimate resources? Well, I guess not. There's no zero risk, but I do trust the community better than just myself or even some institutions sometimes. So open source solutions could bring a level of trust that is much higher, at least in my opinion. If I may. When it comes to password management, well, it's good for everything. It's good for your firewall. It's good for, well, actually, all of these software, all the software that you put on your computer, well, even your antivirus, if your antivirus becomes a malware, well, we have access on everything that is going on in your computer. And then to get back all the data on your computer, well, what's saying Thierry is accurate. A business that develops an antivirus software, well, that's their business. If clients does not trust it, well, the business would go bankrupt. That's reality. But this reality can evolve and rather quickly. The international contacts, the evolution of threats, some software that we could trust in the past are not reliable anymore. For instance, I'm thinking of some Russian software. I don't want to name it here because I don't want to have any problems. But it's not so long ago, some countries would recommend in this software, and now not anymore. So what's important to say is that these businesses, yes, should rely on the trust from their clients, but this trust can evolve because of the geopolitical context. Some businesses can have pressure from governments. They can provide data. So it's really not easy to know where to head. So I wanted to add this. I wanted to underline that this question could be rather difficult to answer. Anyone else would like to add something? If not, I have a question from the audience. Can you hear me? Yes, you may speak. I don't really have a question. It's more like a comment. I know that zero risk does not exist. It's really far for the interpreter. I cannot hear. There's no riskless life. We walk on the street, we get a bit hit by a car. Well, it's the same thing when we provide information. Well, when you're sharing your data, it's a little bit like walking on the street. Do you walk in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. without any protection in an unsafe area? Thinking that now in 2022, that someday we're going to be in a world where there's no risk online, it's a bit ludicrous. You're on the internet, you can have your data breached. Well, the only thing we can do is inaudible to the interpreter. Right now on the internet, for instance, I lost $3,000 on my credit card. Even if there was some police online, you would not be able to avoid all the problems and the issues. Can you hear me? More or less. I cannot hear well. Now can you hear me? Now I can hear you, yes. I was only simply saying that one of the ways to protect yourself, but the problem is you can, the internet is without borders. How can you create laws when you don't have control over all the borders? And as long as we don't, and as long as the internet will not have any borders, well, how can we solve this? So should we just not change people's perception? Should we not be clear and tell people that if they go online, well, it's like you're going out in the middle of the night. It's not business fault. It's not government's fault. That's just the way it is. You need to have bigger weapons, but it is ludicrous to make people think that they can be completely safe, because somebody else on the other side of the world could be using our data. Anyone who wants to reply? Here we have the opinion that zero risk is impossible. Well, it's not because zero risk is impossible. Well, doesn't mean we cannot take the means to protect yourself. I can put a barricade on my windows to make sure that they're not broken. security measures on airplanes do exist. Why do we do all of that? Is to provide a sense of security. It is not because zero risk exists that we have, there's nothing we can do. If I have money on me in the middle of the night, well, I'm not going to show everyone. Of course, cybersecurity says that zero risk does not exist. We have to accept it. However, it doesn't mean that people cannot take certain measures. And it's rather new in our history, all these preventive measures online. We have to educate people. We have to help people learn to manage risk. We do it for our homes. We do it for our cars. We're using a seatbelt when we're driving. Maybe a seatbelt will not save your life. I won't prevent an accident for sure, but it can help. You have to manage risk. You have to use different passwords. You have to manage your accounts. You have to make sure that cybersecurity is done in a proper way. Don't put your whole life on social networks, for instance. Of course, not the name of your grandmother, because this is sometimes a question that is asked. So these are the sort of things that, zero risk does not exist, obviously, but you have to manage this risk. You have to diminish it. And you would do the same thing in your regular life. Mr. Harper? When we're talking about zero risk, don't quit. Don't throw the towel. Just don't say it's impossible. I think that's the danger. I think hopefully that's not the message that we're sending. And on several points, well, cybersecurity is a lot better than it used to be. In the beginning of the internet in the 1990s, well, you could be sitting at a coffee shop and you could go on a Wi-Fi and you could just gather everyone's data. And you could then enter on any Facebook account that was around you. And now, well, we have found ways to solve this. Yes, there are still some cyber attacks because they're very small people who are very determined, who want to breach data, but things are getting better. Madam Vermeyden?
I just want to comment in terms of the question, how do we tell people that it's dangerous online? I think the answer is yes. Even though we manage the risk, the thing is we need people to understand that the risk needs to be managed. And if people don't see the act of going online as inherently dangerous every time, it's hard to get people to realize then, oh, I need to do X, Y, Z to stay safe. I need to wear my seatbelt. So I think the first step is to tell people, yes, the internet is dangerous. You can get hacked anytime you go online. It can happen to anyone, anywhere. Here are the things you do to make it less likely. So I think both pieces are important to have. First, yes, it's dangerous. Absolutely. Very dangerous. Here is how you can help yourself.
Monsieur Cuppens, puis je reviens sur la salle.
Oui, le risque zéro n'existe pas.
Zero risk does not exist. First, because anyways, there's humans in that loop, and somewhere we know that human factors will do in such a way that somewhere there will always be the possibility of human error, which does, but that's not specific to cybersecurity. All domains that we've talked about when you take your car, zero risk does not exist either, and that does not prevent us from being on the roads and traveling. What I would like to say in relation to this is that we're speaking a lot about cybersecurity in terms of protection, in terms of detection, but there's still a new concept which is emerging, which is cyber resilience, which is that cyber resilience in some can be described in the following way. The question that you must ask yourself is, if a cyber attack is going to happen, when will it happen? I think that that's what's important to remember, is that today, any business, we've talked about ransomware, any business is potentially vulnerable to a ransomware attack. So the question is one day, will I be attacked by ransomware? And the question is, what's going to happen if indeed I am being attacked by ransomware? And that's all the question of cyber resilience. Meaning, am I prepared to a ransomware type attack? And the answer, unfortunately, is that most businesses aren't prepared to this. Once their data are encrypted, they do not have access anymore. So there's two possibilities: either you go bankrupt or you pay the ransom. And that is contrary to the principle of cyber resilience. Cyber resilience must predict, I'm attacked, I have a ransomware. What have I foreseen in that situation? Do I have my backups? Am I able to restore my system enough? Indeed, once I've restored my system, well, am I capable of continuing my operations normally? All of these questions, which are about cyber resilience, are essential to rethink all of the cybersecurity in that direction. We can generalize this to cyber attacks and rethink about cybersecurity in that way. This appears essential to me, and that's also how we will be better manage the risk, and not to think just about detection and as we do today. It's a pretty vast domain. I come back to press on the other button. The other one is better. The other one, because it will activate the right portion of your... Do you hear me now? You're not hearing me. We hear you. It's okay. As a matter of fact, I didn't express myself adequately. The question was more how to prevent those who steal the information on the internet, how to stop them, to incite them not to do that anymore. That's why I say that in real life we've created police, but in the internet world, we protect ourselves, but these people, there's not, how do I say, there's no impunity. People, and it's understandable, because internet is beyond borders. So unless there's a world police of the internet, if, for example, in Canada, we have laws that protect us or which punish those who hack, well, yes, but we're hacked by people which are outside of Canada too. What's going to happen then? My question was really, it's not a question of zero risk. We know that zero risk does not exist. However, how can we create sanctions which will scare these people as we create sanctions in real life, so that we reduce crime? Sanctions with the internet is hard because there's no borders. That's my question. I ask myself the question is, does the police really prevent crime? Is the fact that having police prevent, some will say, yeah, I don't want to start a debate on the usefulness of the police. That's not the objective. But the fact that there's a police, does it really prevent crimes from happening? The answer is no, because there's still crimes which are happening today. So the difficulty with internet, as you've mentioned, is there's no borders, and there's ways to hide which exist, which do in such a way that it makes it extremely difficult to identify the identification of people. There are techniques to hide so that you don't know who it is, or worse, as I think Samuel had alluded to that, there are groups hacker groups which are supported by states. So it's going to be difficult to do a police when there's states which support these crimes. So it comes with its own challenge. I mean, the only thing that I could say, there is no miracle solution. The ideal thing would be to have an Interpol or something like that, but it's going to be difficult. There'd have to be a world agreement, and thanks. Just a comment about this. I'm not in agreement with the fact that the cybercrime would be more international than other crime. I will take, for example, the case of drug trafficking. It's an international problem. Okay, so there's a country which exports drugs towards another country, and at the end, we indeed want to incriminate someone which is foreign. In practice, there are things which exist. There are international drug cartels which were dismantled, even if at the end the country didn't necessarily have international relationships with Western countries. That example, I can reuse it and retranslate it exactly in the same way for cybercrime. And today, I have very practical examples where cartels of cybercriminals have been dismantled, even if at the end they were in countries which appeared to be difficultly accessible. So I think that it doesn't mean that everything's perfect, and that's not what I want to say. But what I want to say is you don't necessarily must see the problem of cybercrime as very different problematic than the more general problem of crime in the world. Techniques in the end to dismantle a cartel of cyber criminals will resemble techniques to dismantle any cartel. We will do infiltration. We will try to go back to the source. We will try to not tackle uniquely to the end links, but we'll try to race into the direction. So in terms of techniques, there are very similar techniques which are used elsewhere to fight against crime. Naturally, what was said was accurate. To get back to the source can be a lot more complex in the case of a cybercrime. That's true. That is true, but it doesn't mean that we aren't successful doing it. The fact that cybercrime be world-based is also reality, but it's not a sufficient reason to say that we cannot do anything in terms of cybercrime. So that's it. Thank you. Is Mrs. Vermeyden? That'll be the final words because the topic is very, very broad. I had 4 questions which weren't addressed at all. So for now, I'm beginning to thank you. I will get back to Mrs. Leah.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment on that last. I think. And I'm also in accord with that. I think specifically the type of policing that has to take place to deal with crime on the high seas when you have international waters, etc. I think that would be an interesting. That is being developed, but it is still a lot of work to do there. So I think that it would be interesting to see whether there are some lessons there to learn and how we police cybercrime as well. Thinking of the internet as a little bit like. International waters or the high seas. Yeah. That's it for me. Thank you.
Donc, merci, vraiment, merci.
Thank you, really. Thank you, everyone. We have, thank you for your generosity and your time. And I hope that we will be able to see one another for another element on Montreal or online about cybersecurity. So for now, I thank you. I also invite you to stay for the roundtable on data. It will touch a bit the topics which are similar to that of cybersecurity. So if you have time to remain with us, you are welcome. So for now, I thank all 4 of you for your time and your generosity. This was really very interesting. Thank you. Have a good end of day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Otherwise, for participants which will remain online for the other session, we should start in 5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes late.